let's talk about the Pinephone. So first thing, let's get the specs out of the way. So the Pinephone, this is the Manjaro edition, and it's the Convergence edition model, so it has a little bit higher specs compared to the base model. The CPU, it's an all-winner A64, it's a quad-core SoC with the Mali 400 MP2 GPU. It's got 3 GB of LPDDR3 memory, a 6-inch screen with a resolution of 1440 by 720, so it has an 18 by 9 aspect ratio, 32 GB of onboard eMMC storage, USB Type-C, headphone jack on top. Of course, it has all the usual sensors and connectivity that you would expect from a standard phone. The only thing that's worth mentioning that's missing is the NFC, but there's still a possibility that it will be added by just using a different back cover, since we have those pogo pins on the back. So for now, let's just move on with the external hardware. The main camera is 5 megapixel and the front camera is 2 megapixel. Nothing really to write home about. They're very standard, unimpressive cameras as far as the hardware goes. It's got an RGB status LED on top that lights up depending on, depending on what applications actually make use of it. And it's got a removable 3000 mAh battery that's compatible with the Samsung J7 from 2015. So if you want to buy another battery, like a spare battery for this phone, and it's fully compatible with the Pinephone, so it's really great that you can do that. Let's talk a little bit about the ports here. So on the bottom you have a standard USB Type-C port that of course does the usual charging and has on-the-go device capability. So if you want to connect a USB Type-C USB stick or any other kind of device that just runs on the normal USB protocol, you should have no problems. It should just work on this phone. The other very nice thing about the Type-C port, and this is what makes the whole convergence idea possible, is that it also supports display output from it. So if you bought the Convergence edition, your phone also would have shipped with something like this. So this is a USB Type-C dongle dock. It plugs onto your phone via USB Type-C, and on the other side you have 2 USB Type-A ports, those are USB 2.0, an HDMI port, Ethernet, and another female USB Type-C port for charging while you're using this little dock here. So this is actually not really impressive hardware. This little dock here is something that you can get from, I don't know, Amazon. Any store has USB-C compatible docks. You shouldn't really have too many problems with different docks. In fact, I do have a different one that I bought for my laptop. So it's very similar as far as the layout goes. It's got 3 USB Type-A ports. One is USB 2 and the other 2 are USB 3. Of course, your device needs to support USB 3 if you want to go at USB 3 speeds. And then a full-size HDMI port here, SD and microSD readers, Ethernet jack, and another female USB Type-C port for charging while using this little dock here. These two devices are fairly similar, and you can buy any of these things online for very cheap, so not really something too impressive. The really important and impressive thing here is that this phone is capable of using these docks. So this actually makes this device a lot more functional, since you can just plug a monitor, a mouse and keyboard, and use this phone as effectively a full-size PC, or at least in a PC form factor. Of course, you would be still limited by the hardware on this device more than anything else. But technically speaking, yes, you can use this as a full-on Linux PC. One other fairly interesting thing about this phone is that on the back, there are some pogo pins that you can already pretty much use and basically extend the functionality of this phone even further by doing some hardware modifications. So these pogo pins, they can carry and receive power, and there are also some data lines that you can use. What these pogo pins allow you to do in theory is to create a replacement back cover that has some expansions. Like Pine64 right now is working on a replacement back cover that gives you wireless charging and NFC, and they're allegedly also working on an add-on that gives you a physical keyboard, like a slide-out keyboard that you can attach to this device via the pogo pins. So no messy cables, no weird stuff. You can just use those pogo pins on the back. This makes this device really nice if you want to hack on it to make some expansions. I'm pretty sure that the hacker community has already tried using like 3D printed back cases and adding functionality already. So it's very nice to have this sort of thing in this kind of device since, well, to be honest, this is more targeted towards hackers than anyone else. Final very interesting thing, very close to those pogo pins, on the Pinephone you will also find some dip switches that you can use to disable the microphone, the camera, the GPS, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and the cellular connectivity modem. So you can disable all of these hardware devices, like interrupt the current flow to them by just using those dip switches on the back, which is very nice, particularly if you're very privacy conscious and you don't want to have like all those sensors or all those devices powered on when you're using your phone, or if you maybe just don't really care about them, you just need this device as a development device, you can disable those. It's fairly easy. Again, you just have to turn off those dip switches and that's it. Again, very convenient. They're not really accessible from outside the phone. You really have to remove the back cover, but it's better than not having this possibility at all. This phone also has a micro SD card slot, which is already pretty much a rarity when it comes to smartphones these days, but that's not all of it. In fact, the phone is able to boot from the SD card if, of course, you flashed a compatible operating system. Of course, there are many different Linux distributions and, well, other operating systems for this phone already, and you can try them without having to mess around with your internal eMMC by just flashing them onto an SD card and putting the SD card in the phone and booting from it. It will be automatic if the phone detects that you have a bootable SD card inserted. It will boot from that. The only real limiting factor about using the microSD is that the speed is a little bit slower. In fact, the speed limit for the microSD should be around 25 megabytes per second for the SD card, and you can compare that to the approximately 80 megabytes per second of the internal eMMC. So it's a little bit slower, still pretty usable. And once you have your programs loaded into memory, you're not really going to notice much of a difference. Okay, now that we have the hardware out of the way, let's talk about the software. So this is the Manjaro Community Edition of the Pinephone. It means that, of course, this ships with Manjaro ARM. And this is an official build, of course, from the people over at Manjaro for this particular phone. Still, it's not great. In fact, I'm not even running Manjaro right now on this phone. I'm running a custom build of Arch Linux. Of course, you know me, you know that if I can stick Arch on something, I will probably do that. So not too much of a surprise there. But the software ecosystem in general for this phone is pretty much the same regardless of the operating system that you're running. So the most popular operating systems right now for this phone are, of course, Manjaro ARM, this particular Arch Linux build that I'm using, Postmarket OS, KDE Neon, or other Plasma Mobile-based operating systems, a Debian-based distro called Mobian, which stands for Mobile Debian, I guess, and of course UBports, along with other more exotic ones that I don't really care too much about, to be honest, like Luna OS, or Selfish OS, or Maemo Leste, which is like the continuation of Migo. I don't want to really get too deep into that. Doesn't really matter too much. What I'm interested in here is having a Linux phone. I don't care for anything else. There are also builds of Android that run on this device. Again, not really the point. If I wanted to run Android, I would have bought a regular Android device, and for the money, I would have probably bought something more powerful. So as I was saying, if you want to try out different operating systems, this phone is particularly well tailored towards that because of the fact that you can boot directly from the microSD card. Although if you want to flash the internal eMMC and if you want to flash a different operating system like I did to your internal eMMC storage, you can do that using a little image called Jump Drive. So Jump Drive, funnily enough, you have to flash that to an SD card to be able to flash the internal eMMC. So it's just like any other operating system image. You just download that and flash it to another microSD card that you have lying around. And then you boot your Pinephone, connect it via USB to your PC, and it will be exposed to your computer operating system just like as a normal block device that you can write on using DD or Etcher or whatever program you want. You can even mount that if you want and like transfer files and stuff. It's good if you like bricked your device or something and need to recover some files or whatever. It's really handy and it's really, in my opinion, the best way to do this kind of stuff. You just expose the device as a block device and then let the PC operating system handle it however it wants and however the user prefers. So at that point, flashing the operating system to the internal eMMC is just as easy as flashing any other operating system image onto an SD card. You have to treat it like an SD card. It's basically the same thing. It's not very different. About how the operating system actually runs, to be honest, I was pretty disappointed. I've tried a couple of distributions. I've tried, of course, Manjaro ARM. I've tried the current Arch Linux build that I'm still using to this day. I've tried KDE Neon, and I briefly tried Ubuntu Touch. None of those really work too well on the Pinephone. And what I mean by that is that it's not really a matter of general stability. Considering the kind of device we're talking about here, the stability is not really all that bad. In fact, the whole experience is decently stable already. The real problem that I'm concerned about here, and it makes this phone not ready for any kind of daily driving, is the fact that everything is incredibly slow. And I'm talking about opening applications and using applications. Excluding some little exceptions, most applications on the Pinephone will run very slow. And I'm not talking about Android applications or stuff like that. I'm talking about native applications that are built for this phone. And I'm not really sure what's going on with that, because some of my applications as well do run very slowly. This is more like a widespread problem with this phone. Like I'm using Phosh right now. That's the phone shell that Purism is developing for their Librem 5 phone. And of course, being open source, you can use that on the Pinephone. And in fact, many operating systems for the Pinephone do use Phosh as their desktop environment. So right from the lock screen to the very small desktop environment, that's basically just a list of applications, to any app that you will open, this phone is slow, and it is noticeably so. The only exceptions are MPV when it's full screen, Firefox if you're not doing anything too crazy, and weirdly enough, Chromium. I'm not sure really what's going on here with this device. To my understanding, the whole driver situation on it is not really in the best shape. In fact, there is a driver in Mesa, well, at least in Mesa Git, to my understanding, that makes this GPU work. But the problem is that, apart from the fact that, well, the hardware is just weak. It's not the best hardware out there. Yes, it's a quad-core CPU, but it's a very slow one. And the GPU as well, it's not really all that powerful. And the other big problem is that the GPU only supports OpenGL ES, a reduced version, like a subset of OpenGL for embedded systems. That's typically what your Android devices support as the main version of OpenGL that they will run with. And the problem is that, of course, since we're talking about Linux distributions that are originally thought for the desktop, many applications just don't support OpenGL ES, and Firefox is sadly one of them. I'm pretty sure that both GTK and Qt don't support OpenGL ES, or at least don't support it very well, because both GTK and Qt Kirigami apps, at least the few that I've tried, don't really run too well on this device. They're slow and choppy, and the animations that just don't work as they should. This was a real bummer for me, mostly because I really wanted to use my own applications on this device, them being feeds, most importantly for reading my news, and what IP comes in handy. For Jara, actually, one of the reasons why I made it was to be able to use it on the Pinephone. And of course, I'm not able to. Also because Jara turned out, okay, if you don't know what Jara is, it's an application for Reddit that I've been working on. It's written in GTK and Python, my usual stack that I use. It's already working pretty nicely on desktops. So if you use it on your PC, you already notice that it's pretty good. But on phones, it's so slow. It's already a pretty heavy application by itself because of all of the images that I load and all of the avatars and the rich aesthetic of the application. So of course, it's one of those applications that are on the heavier side to run on a low-end device such as the Pinephone. Still, they're not usable. Even if I disable images, and I really tried many tricks to make these applications run better on the Pinephone, I wasn't able to make it work as I wanted to. And I'm pretty sure that the biggest problem right now is with hardware, or to be more precise, with the optimizations for this specific hardware. And this is one of the bigger problems with the ARM ecosystem. Your CPUs and GPUs, yes, they're somewhat standard. They have binary compatibility of some sort with each other, but they're very different between one another. And on the x86 space, so on the PC space, we have Intel and AMD for CPUs and some other lesser known manufacturers that are still compatible with x86 software, no problem. And for GPUs, we have Intel, AMD, and NVIDIA. And rest assured that except for NVIDIA that does their own weird things with Wayland and stuff, every other manufacturer for GPUs, once you have the driver loaded, everything works exactly or mostly the same on every system. And of course, this has to do with the fact that x86 PCs have been around for a lot longer, and really there aren't many companies out there making CPUs and GPUs. We have 3 companies in total in the PC space making both CPUs and GPUs, and both are heavily invested in making drivers for the most common operating systems, meaning, of course, Windows and Linux. But in the ARM space, we have lots and lots of CPU manufacturers. Just off the top of my head, we have Qualcomm, Allwinner, Rockchip, MediaTek, and Samsung has their Exynos lineup as well. We have Huawei with their Kirin ARM CPUs, SoCs, whatever. And for GPUs as well, they're not all the same. Mali is a very popular GPU that you will find typically in ARM SoCs, but it's not the only one. Qualcomm has their Adreno lineup, and there are others that I just don't remember off the top of my head, but you get what I mean. The biggest problem here is that typically these manufacturers, these vendors, don't really care too much about compatibility outside of what those specific pieces of hardware were meant to do. So in the case of the Mali GPU, you will find an OpenGL ES driver, but that's it. You will not find a full-on OpenGL or Vulkan driver for this GPU because, well, of course, it's lesser known, it's less popular, and there's less drive from the wider development community to make drivers for these graphic subsystems for these lesser known or lesser common GPUs. So of course this is one of the problems, but it's not the only one. The manufacturers as well, they don't really care about having you run, let's say, Vulkan on a Mali GPU because it's just not designed for that. Of course, they could do that because the hardware, I'm pretty sure it's capable of it. Don't quote me on that, whatever. But I'm pretty sure it will work on this kind of hardware. They just don't care because they're making Mali GPUs mostly to run Android on, and Android doesn't use anything but OpenGL ES. As far as the overall fit and finish of the operating systems, if you can ignore the overwhelming slowness of the whole thing, it's actually pretty decent. I mean, of course, this phone is not using any very new technology. It's using GTK mostly for most applications, and GTK is actually pretty old at this point, and it's pretty tried and true. Particularly GTK3 is about at the end of its life. Well, not really at the end, but GTK4 is coming, and of course, there are no many big changes in GTK3. It's a very stable toolkit at this point that behaves as you would expect it to. Same thing goes for Qt. There's no real big innovation as far as the software side goes. And that means, of course, that we have a very stable operating system. Of course, the overall stability depends on the quality of the applications that you're using. But as far as like the infrastructure and the environment around the software for this phone, it's the same environment software-wise you will find on your Linux PC. It's the same or most of the same open source software that you're already running on your desktop PC. So as far as that goes, that's actually something that's very important to me, and one of the reasons why I bought this device in the first place and why I'm interested in such projects, in running Linux on your phone, because I want to be able to use my full-on desktop applications adapted to run on mobile. I don't want something different. I don't want a stupid Android app that can, I don't know, looks flashy and nice, but doesn't do anything at all. I don't really care about social media and all that kind of stuff. I want to be able to do my work on my phone. And that's something that this device, like the Pinephone and the Librem 5, they're trying to achieve exactly that. Of course, because of the performance issues I just talked about, this is still not very close to being a reality. Of course, all of this will be possible once the wider development community finds out a way to make a better use of the hardware on this phone. Right now, the biggest problem is, again, the performance. You cannot use this phone as of right now to do anything but maybe using the terminal. And even that, it gets pretty slow depending on what you're doing. I don't really think it's worth it to go too deep into the various different operating systems or desktop environments, because overall they're all doing a very good job. But again, this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense right now, because we need to work on performance. Once that's solved, we can start looking at different desktop environments and what runs better, what works better for you. You can have your preference and whatever, just like on the desktop ecosystem with Linux, you can do that. But right now we have bigger problems. It doesn't really make any sense right now to talk about desktop environments. Personally, I don't mind Phosh. It's pretty decent. I like Plasma Mobile as well. It's still Plasma. And if you know me, you know that I'm not really a huge fan of Plasma. It's just not to my liking. That's all. I don't have anything against it, of course. The last big thing I want to talk about is like the convergence. And convergence actually works as you would expect. You plug in your USB Type-C dock, you plug the USB keyboard, I have a Bluetooth mouse, you can use a wired mouse of course, and plug the whole thing into a monitor, and you have like an extended desktop. And there's not really too much to say about it. You can use your desktop applications in a desktop form factor but running on a phone. It's pretty decent. The only real big problem is that Phosh is probably a little bit too heavy, or maybe against a problem with the performance with GTK, as I was talking about earlier. And I found that if you want to run anything actually semi-productive on the Pinephone in convergence mode, you're better off using a different desktop environment like Sway or i3, or I don't know if you can get Xorg to run this device. I haven't tried personally. I don't really care too much about Xorg. But I guess if you can manage to, you can run XFC or Mate or whatever. If it's a lightweight desktop environment, it will probably work better for convergence. If you try to run 2 or 3 apps on the Pinephone in convergence mode, you'll see lots of stuttering and everything will be super slow. It's not really anything doable. On the contrary, while using Zway, I was able to, well, navigate a couple web pages in Firefox, open a couple of terminals. Nothing really too impressive, but still, it's usable that way. I also think that there's a couple of problems with like compositing or whatever, or anyway, the Phosh desktop environment or the FOC compositor for Wayland which is the actual window management part of Phosh, probably has some issues with compositing right now, because I noticed that if I try to open a video in MPV, which by the way is the only media player that I found to be actually working on a Pinephone, if you open it and you keep it in like windowed mode, so to speak, it means that you will see like the top and the bottom bar. It will be very slow and you will see lots of stuttering, but if you open it in full screen mode, so in MPV you just have to open the keyboard and press F or like double tap and hope that it gets registered as a double click. And so that the app gets to full screen mode, the performance of the video playback is actually a lot better. That leads me to believe that there are some problems with compositing right now, with like window management, compositing and all that kind of stuff that are preventing like things like video playback and applications to run like at full speed at their full potential right now. So definitely something that I need to keep an eye on, and that probably has to do with the fact that the GPU is not really all that well optimized yet. So a couple of closing thoughts on the Pinephone. It's a very interesting idea. It's a very nice development device in a very well curated package as far as like the external hardware, the screen and the build quality goes. It's actually pretty great. For 200-ish euros, I was expecting a lot less, to be honest. And it's a very refined product if you just like look at it and handle it in your hands. But the big problem, again, is in the software optimization right now. Probably if you got like a more powerful hardware, the software optimization problem wouldn't be as noticeable. Still, I don't think that right now anyone can use this phone as a daily driver. It's a fun toy to play with. I knew this when I originally bought it. I didn't expect like blazing fast performance or to be able to actually replace my phone right away. Unfortunately, my prediction was true, so I'll keep on playing with this. Right now, not usable in any sort of functional, productive way, but I hope it will be soon. I know that it has potential. I don't know if it will take some hardware upgrades or whatever to make this actually usable, but I will keep on updating it and I will keep on getting informed about it. And if there's anything new worth mentioning, I will probably make sure to make a video about it at some point. Anyway, guys, this is gonna wrap it up for today's video. If you liked it, please make sure to press the thumbs up button down there, and also remember to subscribe to my channel if you want more of this. Also, remember to join the TechPills community at techpills.technology/community. Thank you again very much for watching, guys, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.